Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonah Prachodayata. Very good. Everything that we see around us, everything that we can conceive, everything that comes into our senses by any route, by any means, is temporal. What is meant by temporal? What is meant by temporal is it has the appearance of reality, but it's not real. Not in the ultimate sense. Is that real? Of course it is. In the empirical sense. We can't walk through a wall. So it's not illusory in the sense that it's not there. It does have its own substantial reality, but it's a temporal reality. Meaning that it's there, I can't walk through it. But will it be there in 1,000 years? Probably not. Will it be there in 1,000,000 years? Absolutely not. So everything around us is temporal. We, of course, in our ultimate essence as spiritual beings are not temporal. We are eternal. However, presently, we are acting as if we too are temporal. That is our problem. That is our illusion. That is our Maya. Therefore, in what is called the Brahma Sutras, the Vedanta Sutras, it says, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Now, then, is the time to inquire into the nature of that absolute, Brahman. Meaning what? We've wasted many lifetimes. How many lifetimes? We don't want to know. As much as some of us pretend we want to know all of our previous lifetimes and, oh, what was I Queen Cleopatra in the previous life? We actually do not want to know how many lifetimes we have wasted as ants, as bums on the street, as kings and queens sometimes. Sometimes doing good things, sometimes doing bad things. Sometimes inching an inch toward enlightenment, sometimes going in the opposite direction. For how long have we tried to live as if we too were temporal? Again, we don't want to know. But Atato Brahma Jignasa, says God, in the form of Vyasadeva, who is an Avesha avatar of Narayana. He says, now then, now that you've spent all this time pursuing everything else that can be pursued, conceivably, that can be pursued, not just here on this earthly plane, but literally playing with the gods, you have pursued everything that you can and have failed. We have not achieved happiness. We have created empires throughout history. America is one such empire that is now coming to an end before our very eyes. We have created so many empires in the last 500, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 100,000 years. But they have been temporal. Atato Brahma Jignasa, now is the time to inquire into the nature of that absolute. Brahman. What is Brahman? What is Brahman? For those of us who are conversant with the Vedic scriptures, we know that Brahman is one of the designations of God, but it's a very special one. It's the most philosophical of them all. In Sanskrit grammar, it is a neuter. It's not a masculine or a feminine. All nouns are primarily masculine or feminine. Brahman is a neuter, interestingly. It's neither masculine nor feminine. Brahman is that absolute which undergirds all of reality, but more than this, Brahman is the very basis of our very own being. Thus in the Upanishads, it has this sometimes very perplexing mantra, Aham Brahmasmi, I too am Brahman. Now what does this mean? I am God? Of course not. Sanatana Dharma does not teach that we're God. Rather, it teaches that we participate in the very nature of God, God being all, God being everything. We too have our foundational reality, the reality of our being, sustained by that ultimate Brahman. What is Brahman? To use the English word, Brahman is God. That which is absolute, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. That which, once you have achieved the highest, once you have realized the highest, once you have found that thing that is the highest, Brahman is above that. That is Brahman. Brahman is not merely the highest. Brahman is the basis of the highest. Such is the inconceivable nature of the ultimate reality. Having said this, why are we alive? Why do we live? Why do we breathe? Why do we have consciousness? It is to know this Brahman, and for no other reason. It is to surrender everything that we are in the highest of what we are at the lowest of what that is. This is why, again and again, for those especially who were raised in Hinduism, you know that again and again, what is the prayer that you find again and again, especially in the Bhakti tradition? O Lord, may I find my ultimate shelter at your divine lotus feet. At your divine lotus feet. For us, the highest that we can achieve is to simply have a glimpse of even the lowest aspect of the divine. If we can serve the feet of God, we have achieved the greatest of all things. Therefore, sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva pabebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. The highest teaching of Brahman himself in the form of Bhagavan Sri Krishna is what? Simply surrender unto me. Simply surrender unto me. I have just explained to you 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita of the highest philosophy humanly conceivable. And now I give you the highest teaching. Sarva dharman parityaja, Krishna says, simply surrender unto me and abandon all of these lesser varieties of religiosity, all of which are man-made, and simply surrender egolessly that which you ultimately are to that which is your source. Thus, Brahman, to know Brahman, is the highest. Now, this leads to what is going to be a very important, very special ceremony that we're about to do today. That is a Brahmana initiation. I want to talk a little bit about what is the nature of being a Brahmana, what is sometimes mispronounced as Brahman. That's the English version. That's the Old English version of the word Brahmin. It's not Brahman, it's Brahmana. A Brahmana, very simply and succinctly put, is an individual who knows Brahman. That is the etymological root source of the noun Brahmana. A Brahmana is one who knows Brahman, one who knows the Absolute. Now, having said that, I want to talk just very briefly, because it's unfortunate that we need to talk about this. I want to talk very briefly about the difference between what is truly a Brahmana in the Varna sense, in the sense of Varna, in the Vedic sense, versus this perversion that has come into being known as the caste system, which has nothing to do with Sanatana Dharma, nothing to do with what we call Hinduism, miscall Hinduism, nothing to do with the Vedas, and nothing to do with what it means to be a Brahmana. First, very briefly, what is a Brahmana? Very simply, each one of us, when we are born as individual beings, and this regardless of our culture, of our race, of our religion, of our nationality, of what our parents do, each of us is born with our own inherent psychophysical nature. In other words, each one of us who is born, we have our own likes and dislikes. We have our own natural propensities. See, my parents were both laborers. Neither of my parents had more than a high school education. Neither of my parents had any spiritual proclivity whatsoever, any intellectual proclivity whatsoever. The most challenging thing that my parents would ever read would be the New York Daily News. And even that would challenge them sometimes. Me, I began reading when I was maybe 4 years old. I began reading Kant when I was 10 years old. I went on to get a PhD. I began practicing Sanatana Dharma, meditation, yoga, etc. when I was 10 years old. Who I was had nothing to do with what my parents were. So each of us, regardless of who our parents are or what our genetic inheritance may be, we are all ourselves, individuals with freedom, and who should be afforded the freedom to express precisely who we are. Conversely, I can tell you, I know many, many people, many couples, both of who are professors, whose children want nothing to do with even picking up a book. You see? So again, it has nothing to do with parentage. Rather, the idea of of psychophysical nature is this, that each of us as living beings, we are born with what is called Guna and Karma. We are born in a specific mode of nature. We are either born in Sattva Guna, which means that we appreciate the more subtle, more good, more spiritual, more intellectual qualities of life, or we are born in Raja Guna, meaning that we tend to be a lot more passionate in life and we like passionate things, or we are born in Tamaguna, which means that we enjoy the lowest of things. Basically that we're not very intelligent, that we just enjoy the basic things of life. And then you have some admixtures of all of those. Okay? In addition to Guna, we are also born with Karma. We are also born in a specific situation and with a specific nature in accordance with the choices that we made in previous lives. And we're not talking about karma in this sense in the term of merely reward or punishment. That's actually a very not a very advanced way of thinking of karma. Rather, if we think of karma as essentially our present actions creating our future consciousness, then we can understand how karma also plays into what our present nature is like. So Guna and Karma, according to specifically Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, creates who and what we are today. Now, this being the case, in any given society, throughout all of history, and again, think of any society on any continent that you can think of at any point in history, including today, what you will find in any given society is that the individuals of those society will have a natural predilection toward certain things. Those individuals, and these tend to be a minority of people, roughly 1 to 2% of the population, those individuals who, without having to be forced, but it just comes about naturally, inherently, happily to who they are, when those individuals find that they have a natural attraction to spiritual things, that they have a natural attraction to doing spiritual activities, that if they had a choice to go to a bar or go to a library, they would want to go to a library. If they had a choice whether they would want to go to a Packers game or go visit a temple, they would want to go visit a temple. If they have a natural predilection that if they're left alone, if they're given the choice, would they turn on the TV and watch a soap opera, or would they pick up a book? They would rather pick up a book. Okay? Does it make them feel uncomfortable if they have to skip a day without taking a shower? Yes, it does. Do they prefer to be clean? Do they prefer their environment to be clean? Do they prefer to be around other people who are positive, who are spiritual, who are happy, who are good? Yes, that's what they prefer. And I can go on and on and on. Those individuals who have those natural predilections that I just mentioned and more, those are Brahmanas. Those are Brahmanas. And it doesn't matter what their parents are. Those people are Brahmanas. This is what is called the Varna System. This was the Vedic system up until approximately 1300 years ago or so. The idea was that all of us are born pretty much as blank slates, but if you show certain predilections, natural predilections toward a certain type of activity, that's what you were. If naturally it arose in you that you were charismatic and a leader, and you were a warrior, and you knew how to do politics very well, etc., you were a Kshatriya. Didn't matter what your parents were. If you were very good at business, and you were just one of these people who, you give them $1, and a year later they've taken that dollar, and now they have $1 million. That's a Vaishya. You are a Vaishya, if that is what you're like. If, on the other hand, you're the sort of individual who just naturally, if you were given a choice, and if you could make money doing it, you would be very happy just working with your hands and doing nothing else. And you're not very intellectually curious. You just love working with your hands. Then you are a very proud Shudra. So again, this was the original system. What began happening, again, roughly 13 to 1500 years ago, was that this very natural system of looking at individuals, seeing what their natural psychophysical propensities were, and then encouraging them in that way, and thus allowing people to be happy expressing their inner nature, this system was perverted. A very, very long time ago. It was perverted for many, many different reasons. It was perverted because of the enervating influence of what we call the Kali Yuga, which perverts and denigrates everything that it touches. It was perverted because of Abrahamic influence, because frankly, beginning approximately 1300 years ago, we had Islamic invasions of India that absolutely devastated all of Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma in North India. When the Muslims came in, they destroyed every single temple that existed in North India, to the point where to this day, and what parts of India are you from? South. Okay, the south. From Nepal. Well, that's close enough. You both, I'm sure, probably know that in North India, there is no Hindu temple that's more than 500 years old. You both know this. You're from the south. In the south, of course, there was never the persecution of Hindus to the same extent as in the north. So in the south, you still have Madurai, Srirangam, you still have all these enormous, beautiful temple complexes that are thousands of years old. You know the same thing existed in North India, but they're gone. You know that the libraries were burned to the ground. You know that Nalanda University, with 50,000 students, with 50,000 monks, was burned to the ground and all the monks were killed. So as a result, what did we find? And I've written several actually academic papers about this. What we find is that when you have a community, a people, and they suddenly are under the pressure of intense persecution, what do? They contract. They contract and they concretize their society just to survive. Just to survive. This is what happened in Bharat, in India. As a result of this, what we find is that this previously fluid system, where a person could easily change Varna, let's say a person were more of a Vaishya, more of a business person, but then little by little they kind of transformed their nature such that they became more of a Brahmana. Well, that person would then be recognized as a Brahmana. And then vice versa. Many people who were Brahmanas, when they ceased to have the qualities of a Brahmana, and it says this again and again and again and again in the scriptures. I was doing research just last night for this talk today, just looking for specific shlokas, verses from the scriptures, explaining how if a person ceases to act like a Brahmana, they're no longer a Brahmana. I found too many verses saying that, from the Manava Dharma Shastra, from the Mahabharata, from the Upanishads, from the Puranas, from the Aranyakas, again and again and again. If a person is a Brahmana, but they cease to act that way, they're no longer a Brahmana. So at one time this was fluid, but what happened was the entire system became concretized, and it then became by birth. Well, if your parents are Brahmanas, then you are a Brahmana. If your parents are Shudras, you're a Shudra. If your parents are untouchables, so-called, you are an untouchable. This was a perversion of the original system. This is what today is called the caste system. Does anyone know the origin of this word caste? First, of course, you know that caste, the term caste is not Sanskrit. That's kind of obvious. But does anyone know the origin of this term? Castus, Portuguese. It originated from the Portuguese. The word caste does not even exist in Hinduism. It's a Portuguese word. So this idea of caste, of this elitism, where a person is born a Brahmana and simply by that birth alone, they now have certain privileges. This is something that was imposed upon Hinduism, upon Sanatana Dharma, and that not a very long time ago. Now, having said all this, again, what is a true Brahmana? It is an individual for whom it is their natural propensity to exist in sattva guna, in goodness. In goodness. That means appreciating spiritually the finer things of life. Kind of the picture that I was painting before. That given choices, they will always choose that thing that will elevate them. Okay, you have a variety of music that you can choose to listen to. What will you listen to? That music that will elevate you. You will listen to bhajans, you will listen to classical music, you will listen to music that makes you feel closer to the divine. You have a variety of movies that you can watch. Well, what will you choose to watch of your own accord? See, not merely because you think you have to, but what is your natural attraction? Slasher movies, right? No. Horror movies? No. Movies where there is death and violence and just horrible, horrible things, negative things, where everyone just dies meaninglessly in the end. No, we avoid the French existential films. No. Movies, again, that will inspire you. Movies about sages, about saints, about great people of the past. Movies which, when you finish seeing them, you feel inspired to do good. You see? And again, I can go on and on like this. With everything that occurs in your life, and this is the important thing, you choose always that thing which will elevate you. If that is who you are naturally, you are a Brahmana, period. You are a Brahmana. Period. Just going to say one more thing about this aspect of what we're talking about, and then I just want to quickly look at a few statements from the scriptures. This was an interesting story that occurred with me around 1998 when I was in graduate school in Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I was leading this organization that I started on campus, the Sanatana Dharma Students Association. There was this one Indian girl from Andhra Pradesh who was very active in our organization. And wonderful girl. Oh, she was very spiritual, just very intelligent, very humble. She had all these wonderful qualities. And after some time and coming to my talks there, she was inspired to become vegetarian. And she became vegetarian. She had been a meat eater all of her life. And it was very interesting. I was very happy about this. But a few weeks later, something very interesting happened. She came to me and she said, can I speak to you about something? And I said, oh, sure. Well, what is it? And she said, well, I'm having a little problem at home. I'm very happy being vegetarian. I'll always be vegetarian now that I've decided to do this, but my parents aren't happy about this. And I was surprised about this because I knew that her parents were quite religious, actually. And I asked her, well, why aren't they happy that you're a vegetarian? And she said to me, well, our family is from the Shudra caste. And when I told them I was becoming vegetarian, my parents said to me, oh, no, you can't be vegetarians. We're Shudras. We're supposed to eat meat. In our caste, we're supposed to eat meat. And of course, I had to explain to her what I just explained to everyone here. How, no, it's the other way around. If you have a natural tendency to want to eat meat and to want to drink alcohol and to just party every night and etc., 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 then you are a Shudra. Not the other way around. Not because my parents were Shudras, therefore, even though I want to know God, well, I need to kind of suppress that feeling. That is the opposite of Dharma. That is Adharma. This idea that because you're born in a certain caste that you want to know God, but no, now you can't, you're barred. That is not a God that we worship. Who would say such a thing? Now, having said all this, because as people who have been coming here know, one thing that's important, one thing that I stress is everything that we say, everything that we do has to be based in Shastra, has to be based in the scriptures. I want to quote a few scriptures here, and I have the Sanskrit as well, but I'm going to skip the Sanskrit just for time. And if you're interested, I can just give this to you. It has the Sanskrit, it has the exact verse references and everything. But let's begin. From the Mahabharata, Anushasana Parva. It says, quote, neither birth, purificatory ceremonies, nor learning, nor progeny are qualifications for Brahminical status. Only Brahminical conduct is the basis for Brahminical status. Okay? This is Mahabharata. This is our scripture. All right. Let us go on. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 42. And Krishna says, and these are some of the qualities now of what it means to be a Brahmana. So this is Bhagavan Sri Krishna speaking. This is not a politician. This is not a philosopher. This is not an author. This is God. This is Brahman speaking. Shri Krishna Uvacha. Krishna speaking. Peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities by which the Brahmanas work. So these are some of the many qualities that we are meant to cultivate. Again, with the Brahmana, these qualities come more naturally. With almost no one in this world, including even the Brahmanas, are they necessarily brought to their perfection just yet. Even with Brahmanas, the Brahmanas always have to keep in their mind that these are qualities that we are cultivating within ourselves. But it's easier for the Brahmanas because it comes to them more naturally. Okay. Just a little bit more. Again, from the Mahabharata Varna Parva, some more qualities. A person who possesses truthfulness, charity, forgiveness, sobriety, gentleness, austerity, and a lack of hatred is called a Brahmana. So again, these are the qualities that we are meant to cultivate in ourselves if we want to be Brahmanas, which means what? A knower of Brahman. A knower of Brahman. If we wish to know that absolute, now then is the time to inquire into the nature of that absolute. Well, if we indeed want to not merely inquire, but to know that absolute, that Brahman, and thus be Brahmanas, these are the qualities that we must cultivate and aspire for. Just a little bit more. Bhagavata Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 11, verse 21. The symptoms of a Brahmana are control of the mind, control of the senses, austerity and penance, cleanliness, satisfaction, forgiveness, simplicity, knowledge, mercy, truthfulness, and complete surrender to the Supreme Being. I have a lot more verses here, but let's just stop there for right now. I think we are starting to see the general gist of what's being said here. The general internal atmosphere within the mind, within the being of the individual who wishes to be a Brahmana that must be cultivated. An individual who is a Brahmana is someone who has peace, someone who is not agitated. And what does that mean? Someone whose mind is under control, someone who has focus, someone who has the ability to be a Mount Everest, regardless of the storms going on around them. An individual who has the ability to be literally as heavy and as still as a mountain, regardless of anything that's happening, regardless of any external influence that might be there around them. That's a Brahmana. That is a Brahmana. A Brahmana is an individual who is austere. What does that mean? That means that they live a simple existence. Simple existence. You know, it's interesting. When we talk about even simplicity, unfortunately, there tend to be many stereotypes about this. How simple is too simple? You know, what does it mean to live a life of simplicity? Well, does this mean that I can't even own clothing? Well, there are some people who think that. There are indeed some yogis in India who you'll go and you'll see them walking the streets naked. Well, that's going a little bit too extreme. That's going a little bit too extreme. What does it mean? Oh, can I not own a house? Can I not have a shelter? You know, should I take the food that I'm eating and maybe cut that in half, or cut that in a quarter, maybe have 1/10 as much as I'm eating now? What does it mean to be simple? What it means to be simple will indeed vary from individual to individual, but this is the important thing, that we must have no material external encumbrances that keep us from achieving our goal of enlightenment. That is simplicity, and that is the meaning of simplicity. If you can have a Rolls Royce and not have that be an encumbrance to you achieving enlightenment, then you're living a simple life. Realistically, most people can't do that. Most people will try. Most people will say they can. There are indeed many, many wealthy people who will pretend to be spiritual and say, well, you know, it doesn't matter how many material possessions I have. No, it doesn't, but are you being encumbered? You see. So really this is a question that only the individual can answer. And this is not something that could be imposed on people. And people who claim to be religious try to impose such things on others all the time. Oh, your house is too big. Oh, you have too much money. Or you have too much this, too much that. Maybe, maybe not. But only the individual can know for sure. Because only we know what's happening in our hearts. Only we know if we really need to buy that expensive piece of clothing from that very ritzy store. You know, and if it's going to be something that is an expression of ego or something that we are going to use in God's service. You know, I had this wonderful friend, and he passed away in 1994, and I still mourn his passing to this day. He was a Hungarian Swami. Narayan Swami was his name. And he was the humblest, strictest person I knew. He dressed like a Swami. You know, he dressed in kurta, dhoti all the time. He wore tilak. He, had a shaved head. He was very, very strict. But during the 1980s, when there was still a Soviet Union and there was still an Eastern Bloc, he would dress up in the nicest, fanciest suit and tie. He would wear a hat to cover the fact that he had a shaved head and that he was a monk. And he would go to his homeland, back to Hungary, and he would distribute Bhagavad Gitas to people undercover. Why? Because if he was caught, he would be thrown in prison and probably stay for several years. So when I can imagine when he went to the store and he had to buy that suit, you know, externally, what would you see? Oh, some guy buying a suit trying to show off, not knowing this man was buying a suit so he could go and save souls. In Hungary, in East Germany, when there was an East Germany. He went through literally every single nation of the communist bloc. He actually went to the Soviet Union itself and distributed books. And again, if he were caught, he would have spent years in prison. So externally you saw one thing, but what was his motivation in buying that very nice suit and tie? It was to help people. So, all that being said, do we understand now what it means to be a Brahmana? At least maybe more now than an hour ago. One more thing I need to say, and then we're going to have our Homa, our Agnihotra Yagya, and Brahman initiation. One more very important thing I need to say, and that is this, that Sanatana Dharma indeed has gone through tremendous pain in the last roughly 1,200, 1,300 years. It is a religion that went from being the dominant cultural influence of 2/3 of Asia and really over all of humanity, either directly or indirectly, to becoming a religion that today in many quarters is a laughingstock, where people know very little about this religion. They think that we're all a bunch of cow worshippers, you know. They think we're a bunch of idol worshippers. And more sadly, where individuals who practice the religion themselves even have a lot of stereotypes about what is the nature of this religion, and more, where many of the ancient Vedic practices themselves have been compromised. And this is one area specifically in which the Vedic system has been compromised. As we know, today, when Brahmana initiation takes place in Hindu society, it is only men who will have the Upavita Sutra, the sacred thread, awarded to them. Women cannot get the sacred thread. Well, that was not the Vedic system. We know that was not the Vedic system because in the Vedas themselves, in the Brahmanas, a group of scriptures known as the Brahmanas, it can get confusing because there are people Brahmanas, but then there are some books called the Brahmanas as well. But in the books called the Brahmanas, it describes specifically that the Brahman thread was in Vedic times given to women, not just men, and that women wore the Brahman thread. Again, this changed, and that is a perversion. In India, there was one, and there still is one organization that tried to bring back this Vedic standard called the Arya Samaj. You've heard of the Arya Samaj? Very famous organization, even historically, very, very famous. It was one of the organizations that really indirectly led to the independence of India. they began reviving this tradition. And in the Arya Samaj, they give Brahman threads to women. Only Indian women, because the Arya Samaj basically is only for Indians. 3 years ago, I decided to revive the original Vedic standard for all people, for all women. And Tulsi Devi, who was there taking notes, is the first non-Indian woman in history to be awarded a Brahman thread. And right now, she's wearing a Brahman thread, correct? I don't want to speak for you. You are wearing a Brahman thread, which was something that was incredibly controversial. It's one of the reasons why I am no longer the Acharya of the temple here, because it upset people tremendously. Well, this is the Vedic standard, whether it upsets people or not, whether people understand it or not. Both men and women are eligible to wear the Brahman thread if they indeed have Brahminical qualities. And as I said in 2007, and as I will say today, one of my goals is that before I die, it is my hope that I will be able to give Brahman threads to 10,000 women and to revive this Vedic standard the way it used to be, where both women and men were honored for their spiritual qualities. So, Shakti Devi is going to be the second Western woman in history to receive a Brahman thread today. So with that, shall we proceed?